So, first off, do you just want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Sally. I've been working in sport, predominantly football, for about 15 years. My most recent role in football was at UEFA, where I was working as online promotion manager for Euro 2020. But prior to that, I've worked in football in Australia for Melbourne City Football Club as head of fan engagement for Wellington Phoenix, which is a club in New Zealand that plays in the Australian A-League. In a similar role, I worked for the Federation, so Football Australia, and I also worked for the Asian Cup whilst I was in Australia in 2015. And the last role I had in Australia was for the Commonwealth Games, the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games in 2018. So a variety of different major sport events. That's a little bit about me and my background.
And I can see in the background you've got your book cover up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Or in fact, before you tell us about that, can I ask where you got the name Get Your Tits Out for the Lads came from? Because I'm a very big fan personally of the name.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the title, something that I guess all authors often struggle with and can take months for everyone to agree, the publisher, the author, designers. There's so many people involved. And with my marketing and communication background, I wanted something that would stand out from the crowd. Clearly, when you walk into a bookshop, you are competing against many other books. So I wanted something that would make people stop and at least pick the book up, perhaps read the back cover, and then that would hopefully entice them to buy it. So that's a little bit of background about the rationale behind the title, but also it comes from a story. It's revealed in the first chapter. It's something that unfortunately is said quite commonly at football grounds and was said to me in Portugal in Euro 2004. So I tell that little story in chapter 1, and that gives you a little bit of background about the title. So yes, it's controversial, but it's eye-catching. And I think it works for the theme of the book, which is all about gender equality, sexism, and misogyny.
I think you can safely say that if you walked into a bookshop, your eyes would definitely be drawn to the front cover of your book. So I think you definitely tick that box. You mentioned a little bit that it's about misogyny, women's place in football. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that and what actually spurred you to start writing the book?
Sure. So throughout my career, there's been battles quite frequently, unfortunately, about being a woman. And I'm quite strong, independent, resilient. And my way of dealing with the issues when I guess, found that when I was talking and raising some problems, it was often brushed away, brushed under the carpet. So my escapism was to keep a diary. Writing is in my DNA. I love writing. So it wasn't a solution as such, but it helped me in my mental health to be able to get through it and go back to work the next day. So I kept this diary now and then of big things that happened that I can talk easily about to family, friends, colleagues. And then, so I always had in the back of my mind that there was these stories, but I never thought really that it was book worthy. But in 2021, I went to the Euro final, which was between Italy and England at Wembley, as a fan. And I was invited to talk on a Women in Football Australia podcast about my experience of attending that match. And as widely reported in the media, there was lots of sexism stories coming out from that final. And I myself experienced some horrible things, which I talked about on this podcast. And I joked that I had enough stories for a book, and this wasn't an isolated incident. And sadly, this had been happening throughout my career. And the publisher that's now published my book was listening to that podcast and got in touch with me and said, Sally, are you serious about writing a book? And wow. If you are going to write a book, please let me publish it. And that was when I thought, wow, it's about time that I put this into something more than a diary entry on 3 different laptops, 3 different hard drives, some online. I had to try and then gather everything and said, you know, look, it's nothing book worthy at the moment. But she said, send me what you've got and I'll take a look. And from there, very quickly, she offered me a contract to write a book. And I thought, okay, I really need to do it. So that's the story behind why I wrote it.
Wow, I think any experience of a woman in sport, especially at the moment, is definitely book worthy. So I think, was there any apprehension about writing it? Because as a woman in sport myself, I have lots of experiences, probably a lot less than you, and generally quite negative experiences, especially in men's football. And I don't always feel comfortable talking about it. Was there ever a part before the author reached out, even after the publisher reached out, where you were kind of like, oh, I don't know if I can put myself out there and put all the experiences that I've had to go through out there on paper?
Definitely, I have my doubts because you're effectively being a whistleblower. You're speaking up about a topic that a lot of people are too scared to speak up about. But I have made it clear in my book, it's not an attack on any particular individual. It's not an attack on men. I don't blame men for some of the things that have happened. There's a lot of stereotypes, cultural things that we need to change through education. But I wanted to raise awareness. I'm so passionate about the topic, and I'm telling the truth. And it's not about, as I say, pinpointing individuals that have done things wrong. It's more to raise awareness. So although I did have my, oh my gosh, should I, shouldn't I? The more I thought about it, the more I leaned towards, no, let's write a story to shine a light on these important issues and give other women courage to speak up. Because I think I found when I started to tell friends and family and other females that work in sport about it, their stories all of a sudden started flowing, and they had the confidence to share things that they'd been keeping in because they heard me talking about it. So I realized that if only one person reads this book and changes their opinion about sexism and calls out sexism as a result of reading this book, then for me, I've hit the jackpot.
Yeah, and I think, like you said there, a lot of it does just come from starting the conversation. Like I find that some men are willing to have a conversation if you started with them and you educate them. And I think your book is a really, really good way to do that. And not even just men, like you said, it's like deep-rooted stereotypes and prejudice that runs through the whole of society. And I think just education is such a big part of it.
I agree, and it's, as you say, it's not just football. I've used football as that's the platform that's relevant to me, but it's the world. You only need to watch a news bulletin every day. It's not uncommon to hear a story about sexism, whether it's in politics, whether it's in sport, whether it's in science. There are examples of sexism and discrimination of other forms, racism. There's so much hate in the world at the moment. So if I can play a tiny part in the jigsaw puzzle to try and, as I say, educate and change and start those conversations, as you rightly pointed out, then this is giving me more of a platform than what I had prior. Whenever I was in a professional environment and I raised issues and I tried to educate, I was shut down. Nothing ever changed. The same old boys network operated. So it made me feel really small and not worthless. That's too strong a word, but you get knocked down once, you get back up twice. You think, oh, third time, you think, oh, this is a pattern. And that pattern, when it repeats 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, even strong, independent, resilient women break. So that's why I decided to write a book.
Yeah. And I don't know if you felt like this before, but I've certainly felt like when those knockdowns keep happening, I started to get a sense of kind of imposter syndrome, like, should I be in football? Should I be in sport as a woman? Which is such a crazy thing to think, because you can do whatever you want. You should be able to do whatever you want freely and do it at the same kind of rate as men. But I feel like, I don't know if you ever had that feeling, but I've certainly had the feeling of I shouldn't be in sport or I shouldn't be in football.
I think I can echo what you're saying. I feel like as a woman, we have to earn respect and fight so hard to have that place at the table, much more than men do. So immediately when I tell people I'm a Brighton and Hove Albion fan, I followed them since I was a baby, almost 2 years old. And I know a lot about football, and I've coached football, I play football. And instead of just accepting that, they then question my knowledge. Oh, so when were Brighton in the FA Cup final? 1983. And it's always, you have to justify your existence and justify your knowledge. It's not taken as fact. You explain the offside rule. I bet you don't know what offside means, Sally. So I definitely feel like sometimes just because of being female, where there's a stereotype that we can't possibly know about football, and quite often that's men's reaction to me when I start passionately talking about a game or tactical stuff. wow, I've never met a woman that knows so much about football. And so, and that's, you know, it's those things shouldn't be said, and they shouldn't be surprised. And as you said, everyone, no matter age, race, color, gender, can be an expert in football.
Yeah, definitely. I read somewhere that your book it follows your journey from 2004, is it, to 2022? Yes. In those 18 years, how much do you think, one, women's position in football has changed? And secondly, how much do you feel like your position in football and in sport in general has changed, if at all?
Well, it's funny you ask that. It's a great question, because one of the reasons I wrote it is almost that I felt that the progress was too slow. The momentum in terms of women getting more media and spotlight, yes, we're seeing it as a result of England women winning the Euro, which is fantastic. But why has it taken a trophy for people to stand up and listen? You know, if England hadn't have won that competition, which could have easily have happened, would there have been such a fanfare? Of course not. Why should it take a trophy for the media to stand up and talk about women's football? And I think that's what has been frustrating me for so long. In that 20 years, you take a couple of steps forward to take 10 steps backwards. And every time I thought, oh, yes, there's progress. We've done something. We've changed something. Something would happen that would take us back to the 1950s again. And I'd be like, how are we ever going to reach equality? And even the World Economic Forum recently posted a stat that at the current rate, it will take 131 years from now for equality to be reached. The year 2154, if I remember correctly, which is clearly not in my lifetime. And it's great that we're seeing change and the momentum is shifting, and more women's football, women in media. There's so much of that in the spotlight, which is a great thing. But for me, it's still, the gap is enormous, and we're nowhere near where we need to be in 2023.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And like you said, the Euros definitely shone a light on women's football. But I was even surprised, obviously we have the Women's FIFA World Cup coming up this summer, how little it's been advertised. How before the Men's World Cup, I would see it on buses, I would see it in coffee shops. It was always advertised on the TV. I can honestly say I've rarely seen anything covering the women's football. And I know part of that is because they've only just recently kind of nailed down who has the rights to show it. But even that in itself, it says a lot that it's also last minute and no one's really that bothered about covering the women's football. It's the World Cup, and England women's team, you can arguably say, are more exciting to watch than the men at the moment.
Yeah, and they just won Women's Euro. Can you imagine if the men had won the Men's Euro and then we're heading into a World Cup, we would not stop hearing about it. And similarly to you, I thought about that. I reflected on that the last few days. I am seeing a bit in the media about the women's team on social media. They started to train, and I think we're 22 days out now from kickoff. So it's building. But I thought, I haven't heard anything else about any other team. So yes, I follow England women on Twitter. But as you said, it's such a huge event. It's the World Cup. It's happening the other side of the world. But maybe I want to hear about the other teams that are competing and what players to look out for. All those types of media reports that you normally get for the Men's World Cup. There's so much build-up. There's so many stats flying around about strikers, about the best goalkeeper, about the player to watch. I haven't read anything about anyone else other than England. No. So it just goes to show, yes, there is a little bit of media attention, but it's not what it should be to achieve equality.
Do you ever think that in order to achieve full equality or to have a wider conversation about women in football, we need more men to do that? Because I always feel like Ian Wright is someone that always stands out to me. He's such a big advocate for women's football, and he always puts forward his views and always stands up for women's rights and kind of like equality within football as a man. And I feel like even though it shouldn't be the case, more people listen to him than if it were a woman saying it. Do you think in order to move forward quicker or even at all, we need more men to be part of the conversation?
I think we need allies, whether they're female or male. I appreciate all the men that support and, like you say, are ambassadors for it, such as Ian Wright. I think even Gareth Southgate came out with a statement a few years ago saying there weren't enough women working in the English FA, and his daughter pointed out to him that the percentage was not very good, and he agreed with her. So it's great to hear men backing women, but at the same time, I think we just need allies, whether they're male or female. Everyone around the sport needs to recognize the issue, and we need to fundamentally understand as well that men and women are different. So I cannot think like a man because I'm not one. And similarly, men cannot think like us. So we need to educate each other. And there are differences. I mean, when we often hear criticism about women's football, that it's slow. Oh, you watch a Premier League men's game and then you flick on to a women's game. Of course it's slower because we're physically not the same as men. The same way as a 100-meter male runner runs faster than a 100-meter sprinter that's female, but you don't hear the commentary saying, oh, it's a bit slow, look at this, you know. So we need to appreciate women's football for different reasons and stop comparing what's worked for men isn't necessarily what's going to work for women, and the women's game can be appreciated for many different reasons. So I think, yeah, we need allies in general, to answer your question.
Yeah. And like you said, having a role model or someone to look to is such a big part of it. The girls that participated in the Women's Euros for England, they constantly were saying that they want to be role models to people, in the sense that when they were younger and they were starting off in football, there was no one to kind of look for, like, this is who I want to be when I'm older, because there was no women in football. And it kind of goes not just as a football player, in all types of football, business marketing, literally everything. You need to be able to see where you want to go, and you need people to like watch in order to get there. And obviously it sounds like you didn't have that.
No, you're right. You need to be seen to be believed. And when I was a young girl, this is in the book as well, at junior school, I wanted to play football with the boys. We had a boys' side of the playground and a girls' side of the playground, believe it or not. And
That's
the boys,
problem.
Yeah, they're in itself, what's that all about? But the boys could play football on their side, the girls couldn't. So the rebellious little girl that I was said, stuff this, I'm going to go and play football with the boys. What happened to me? I was punished because I was on the boys' side of the playground, which was forbidden, one, and I was playing football, which was also not allowed. So I got told to stand on the line. So for my break time, when I went to go and play football on the boys' side of the playground, I was told to stand on the line. And I vividly remember that break time, crying my eyes out, going, this is not fair. As a little, I don't know how old I was, 7 or 8-year-old girl. And I remember asking the PE teacher, I want to play football another time. No, Sally, football is for boys. You can play hockey or netball. So in terms of why I've written the book, I guess that's another backstory, because it all accumulates. Those are little things, but when it continues throughout your entire life of being treated unequally just because of your gender, I had to do something. And this is, with my skill set, this was the best thing I could think that would match and give a little bit more of a platform to these important issues.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like we mentioned before, a big part of it starts young. It starts in education. It starts with giving girls the opportunity to do things within school, because if you're 18 years old and it's the first opportunity you've been given where you're allowed to play football, that's no good. If you want to be a professional football player, you can't be starting at 18. You need to be given the same opportunities as boys all the way through school. And for me personally, like, call me crazy, but I think that should just be a given, no?
Yeah, I mean, why do we have to fight so hard? Women's Euro, after they won, they wrote a letter to the government saying, please, now that we've won, can all girls play football at school? Like, what on earth is happening? Why did it take Women's Euro and England winning for a letter to be written to the government for then the law to be changed at schools in England that, yes, girls should be able to play football too? So it is a given. You're absolutely right. Some things are so logical, yet they haven't happened. And there is still, when going back to our earlier conversation, the pace at which things are moving, sometimes you think you're making progress with all the media attention, with all the females now that are doing commentary and punditry on football. But then you hear another story the next day, which just takes you back and you think, wow, hang on, are we making progress? So it's a really hard subject to fix quickly, but I still think we can go faster than we're going.
Yeah. You said then that, like, everything seems like a fight, which obviously shouldn't be the case. You've been working as a woman in football and in sport in general for a long time. How do you kind of keep going with some, like, I feel like if you have to fight for everything, it just drains your energy a lot of the time. Like something as simple as doing your daily job is made that much harder just by being a woman. How have you kind of learned to dealt with the emotional and mental exhaustion that goes along with being a woman in football? And what advice would you give to someone, a woman trying to get into the industry?
Well, it did take its toll. The stories in the book, eventually, as I say, the accumulation time and time again, can only be so resilient. I could only write so many diary entries. I could only kick a ball so hard to get my frustration out so many times. So eventually I had to walk away. It got me that bad that I just thought my mental health is more important. No job is worth your mental health. And I took some time out to reflect, to recover. And so it is a really tough, and that would be my advice to anyone, that no job is worth your mental health. So if you're struggling, so it's much harder to walk away than stay. And that's what friends and family around me, I was extremely brave to walk away from a dream. It was a dream. And when it felt like a relationship breakup, when the red flags outweigh the green flags, ciao, ciao.
Yeah.
But ask me now how I feel about football. And I still believe in the power of sport and the power of the beautiful game. I love it more than most people in the world. I encourage anyone that's not following football to follow football. It gives me escapism. It brings people together from all cultures, diversity, all different backgrounds. It really is wonderful. And I that's in my DNA, and I will never stop loving the game. I just had a hard time working in it. But I still absolutely love it, and can't wait for Brighton to be in Europe next season.
I just wanted to mention Brighton. Where did that come from? Why Brighton?
Well, I grew up there. I was born in Edinburgh.
Oh,
My
okay.
mum is Scottish, but I moved to Brighton or Hove, which is just next to it, when I was little, when I was a baby. So as I say, from a very young age, I've supported the club. Even my first job as a teenager was at the Goldstone ground, which was their old ground, which no longer exists. And I was selling hot dogs and burgers when we were a Championship, League One, League Two. So I've seen the club probably lose more games than they've won, but the recent sort of 5-6 years has been a dream for me. And that's why we love football. It's so unpredictable.
Yeah.
The story of Brighton is incredible. You'll probably regret asking me that last question, because I could talk for another hour about them, but I won't. But you can see the smile on my face. I absolutely love the club. And I'm so excited for the upcoming season, because we've never been in Europe in our history. So it's the first time we're going to play fixtures. We'll find out on the 1st of September whether we're up against Roma, Ajax. I'm not sure who's in the draw yet, but even saying that out loud feels surreal. But I can't wait for Thursday nights.
It is a great time to be a Brighton fan, and I assume that you'll be going to some of the European games, no?
For sure. Thursday nights, the dates are blocked in my diary. Away games, home games, I'll be there. I hope that it lasts for many seasons, but who knows, this might be the only season. Let's not say that, but you never know. So yeah, the fact that I'm in Europe and easily, I guess I can travel easily from Geneva on the train, on the plane, to watch some away games, and perfect on Thursday night, and then a long weekend in whatever destination we end up in.
Oh, what a dream.
Yeah.
Before you go, I just want to ask about the Women's World Cup coming up. Obviously, we've mentioned how the Euros had such a big impact on women in football and just the sport in general. Do you think that the World Cup is going to have a similar effect?
That's a good question. Again, my heart wishes that it would have more of an impact than I actually think that it will have. I mean, it's great for Australia, New Zealand, and that side of the world will get some amazing attention, but the time difference will make it really hard for Europe to build that momentum and media space that it deserves. And I think, as you said, very little, you haven't seen much about it. If you ask 10 people in the street today, where's the Women's World Cup in 3 weeks? I don't think most people would even know where it is, if England are in it, who's playing when. So I mean, if England, in terms of England, if England do well and they reach quarter, semi, who knows, final, then of course, like we saw with Women's Euro, the further they get into the competition, naturally, the more media attention is driven, and they're in the spotlight a bit more. But if England fall out early on, then I think it will almost be, let's look forward to the Premier League, let's look forward to men's football, will still the spotlight again. So it's getting better. I sound very negative. I think it's definitely on the up, but we've got so long to go before I can really confidently say, yes, the Women's World Cup is going to kickstart equality. No, we're not anywhere near that yet.
No. And if you could just think of like one thing of how we could maybe start to move in that direction, what would you say it would be?
I think there's a couple of different things. One you've talked about a little bit already is the education. So to change the mindset of these, what I call dinosaurs at the top that are setting the tone, setting the culture, we need to educate them and change their mindset. And it's hard, but it's not impossible. Like say, there are ways. Is my book a catalyst? It's one tiny thing, but there are other tools to educate. And then we need to get the media to shine a light and start reporting on issues that are in my book and make it normal. And then I think the last thing about that is that when issues are raised internally at workplaces, there is accountability and there is punishment, because at the moment there isn't. And that is what's stopping it from progressing, because people think they can get away with it. Nothing's ever going to change if there isn't any accountability for actions. And I think that's another reason women aren't speaking up, because they know that nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to change. But if that narrative changes, and if the media cover those stories where there is accountability and there is action taken as a result, then slowly but surely the occurrences of sexism, I hope, would decrease.
Yeah. Before I let you go, if you wanted people to take just one thing from your book, what would it be?
It's the thing that I talked about earlier around that if you see anything that relates to sexist behavior or sexism, call it out. I encourage all parents, guardians to educate their children around what sexism is, what's wrong, what's right. And if they see anything at a match in a workplace, don't be the one that just buries it under the carpet. Call it out, have that conversation, be brave. That would be the one thing that I'd encourage people to do, because if we all stay silent, nothing will ever change.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast to chat to us. Congratulations on your book release, and also a big thank you for your continued work in pushing women's rights in football and sport. We need a lot more people like you in order to push forward. It's honestly been such a pleasure to chat to you, Sally.
Thank you very much, Annie. And if I may, I'll just say that the book is available on amazon.co.uk for anyone that would like to purchase it. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, I'll stop the recording.